Welcome into the Ostrom Avenue Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Shulman, alongside Owen Valentine, who is laughing at me for some reason. We're in men's lacrosse season, and we're very excited about it. Before we get into it, make sure to subscribe to us. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe and notifications bell. If you're listening to us on your podcast provider, then make sure to subscribe and leave a rating there. And make sure to check out our Twitter at Ostrom Avenue Pod, all of our individual Twitters at Ben Shulman7, at OValentine14, and at Johnny Giewitz, although Johnny is not with us today, unfortunately. We are joining the men's lacrosse team mid-season because men's basketball kept making us hold on despite the fact we never thought they'd make the NCAA tournament. So the men's lacrosse team, right near the midway point of the year, 4-2, and heading towards Notre Dame tomorrow, a big matchup, a top 10 team in the ACC. But before we get into that, Owen, let's just talk about the team as a whole. What are some of the general thoughts that come to your mind thinking about SU's start to the 2021 season?
Well, first and foremost, I think another good starting spot would be to go back in time, and I believe we did post this. It was live on our WAER airwaves for that special day where it was just nonstop Syracuse athletics coverage over at the radio station. We had an awesome interview with Jay Alter that really helps put a little bit of perspective into this team going into the season and sort of the landscape of the ACC as well. So if we didn't post that, we'll put it up on the YouTube this weekend anyway, so you guys can jump into that and get a little bit of that insight as well. But man, you said it, it's a 4-2 team, and their two losses are reputable losses. I believe Army is up to number 7 in the country right now, and then Duke is unbelievable. They played an absolute thriller with North Carolina last night and won it in overtime. You have two very reputable losses. Obviously, that Army game, I think if you play Army now, you beat Army. It's as simple as that. It was just they weren't quite ready and they started fast, but then the game sort of caught up to them. And so an 18-11 loss to Army is not necessarily indicative of this team. And then I think when you go and just absolutely trounce a Virginia team and double them up and win 20-10, that sort of shows that Army game was not the most indicative of how this team's going to be. And they've played really well since. Their non-conference slate since then was against some weaker opponents, but I think that Duke game, they really battled. And this is a team that's got a lot of fight. And when you sort of circle where you look for this team, it's tough to circle the guys because there is literally so much talent everywhere. And that is the case with a lot of these ACC teams this year, but Syracuse brought back a lot of their talent as well. And the midfield depth stands out. The attack has been awesome. When you look at Rafis, when you look at Owen Hiltz, the freshman number 2 player in the recruiting class, come in and have that early success, there is a lot of different spots to look. And, I just rattled off names. I didn't even mention the 22 and Chase Scanlon. So there is just talent everywhere. The offense has been pretty well distributed as well. Not as much as Notre Dame, as we'll get into a little bit later. But this is a good team, and just like I'll say it now, just like any team in the ACC, they can beat any team they play with relative ease, which is why this conference schedule and this conference slate is just must-watch lacrosse within the entire ACC.
The attack group, the midfielders, both a big focus of this team. Last year, it was all about the middies, but you said it. I mean, Stephen Rafis has had a ridiculous year. He's up to 31 points in 6 games. He only had 2 goals in 5 games last year. He's got 15 this year. Owen Hiltz, the freshman, 26 points in 6 games and didn't even start the first one. And then Chase Scanlon, the team leader, with 18 goals, 25 points in 6 games. The entire attack group through and through has been absolutely dominant. I'm going to ask you to pick one player, not necessarily from the attack or even from the offense, but who's the one player that's been the breakout guy for you so far in this campaign?
Oh, it really is a cop-out, but I absolutely love watching him play. It's Owen Hiltz. I mean, just to see some of his stick talent, his wrists are second to none in college lacrosse. He has some of the fastest wrists that you'll see. And that's why he's so effective right in front of the cage, is he is so quick catch and shoot. And I just imitated it for our viewers, or for our listeners who couldn't see. And if you just like tripled my wrist speed, that is Owen Hiltz in front of the cage. It is so quick. It's so much fun to watch. There are other guys that have jumped in and been that breakout guy, but just to see 77 come in, and he didn't start game one, but he showed very early that he was the talent that was promised when, you know, he decides to come to Syracuse and continue just that dominance. And to see him come in and have that success, it's been really, really fun to watch.
Hiltz is a good pick. He's definitely a lot of people's choice. For me, I think it's Rafis, the guy I just talked about before. His game has been transformed from this year to the last, and it's not like goal scoring is completely foreign. I mean, this is a guy who put up 20 goals in a season in 2018, but his shooting percentage is at a point that it hasn't been since he was a freshman. He's up to 48% this year, which leads the attack group. And, you know, you could just with the eye test see how his goal scoring ability has completely changed his game. Before the season, you know, a lot of WAER had conversations with different broadcasters to prep for the year. And there was a bit of a consensus that, you know, Rafis is a guy in this loaded offense that maybe you could stick the short pull on because he's not looking to score himself. That's gone. That's way out the window. And Duke fell victim to it last game. Rafis scored a hat trick. So I think, you know, the fact he wasn't on the last Tewaaraton watch list is a bit of a shame. You know, it's a little funny which guys on the team were on it and Rafis wasn't, and I'm not going to call out people specifically, but if he's the team leader in points and he's not on it and other guys on the attack are on it, then maybe the list needs to be looked over again. So I got Rafis. I think some honorable mentions, you know, Tucker Dordevic, 13 goals in 6 games to start the year. He's looked the healthiest he's really been since that initial injury at SU. Owen Seabolt only had 3 points coming into this season, has 9 already in 6 games, including 6 goals. It's been an all-around really positive year for a lot of guys, which means I'm going to flip it over to the negative. What's been the biggest drawback you've seen? It could be an individual player. It could be just a facet or trend of the game. But what's been the most concerning thing for SU so far this year?
I don't know how concerning it is. And I do want to start and just sort of chuckle at the fact that it's incredibly correct when you say Stephen Rafis as your answer. But it is so funny to see a 5th-year guy in the breakout player conversation, just because it's such a rarity, but he really has just absolutely jumped to the table and showed up. I'm not. Oh, you see, you're gonna put me on the spot here, and I don't want to bash him because he has played a decent season. And then obviously when you look at a guy with 25 points, it's hard to say that. But I want to see more out of Chase Scanlon. And I think this last performance against Duke helped him a lot in my eyes. And then, you know, the non-conference statistics don't really mean too much to me in this season. You know, you put up 4 points, 4.7 points against Vermont, Stony Brook, Holy Cross. Oh, well, like, good for you. So what? It's the big games that I want to see him really step it up. Duke was a good sign. To see him have 5 points, 4 goals in that game is a really good indication. But prior to that, in his, you know, his big games at Syracuse, you know, he was pretty much held in check when Syracuse played Army in 2020. And, you know, 3 points, he had a goal and 2 assists this season in that season opener against Army. And, you know, they held him in check for a lot of that game as well. So I want to see him be able to elevate, showcase how I am the 22. I am the guy that, you know, was that cherished transfer, the guy that everyone wanted to get to come to their spot. And show me that that is something that you're worthy of that praise, you're worthy of that number. Because sometimes in those big games, and I know you know, it was a half season last year where they didn't even get into conference play, and this year we're only midway through. I want to see Scanlon elevate even more because I think he has the capabilities to do it, and I want to see him elevate again in those big games. He's right on the brink. He did it against Duke. But until he can start performing against bigger names, bigger defenses, better defenses, he is not in my performing adequately category just yet.
10 days ago, I was right there with you. I think he turned me with that Duke performance. He might have turned me specifically with that ridiculous behind the back goal he had to tie it up at 13 apiece. That was,
He brought me to the fence. He
yeah,
brought me to the fence. That Duke game helped his narrative a lot, or else I would not be as qualifying with my statement right there.
yeah, that was one of those goals. And I was there in Durham for WAER. And I promise you, this has nothing to do with allegiance to either team, because Sowers elicited this reaction multiple times that game, where I had like involuntary movements. Like I had like popped up because I was like, oh my gosh, like what just happened? So, I'm more optimistic. You said, and I agree, Scanlon hasn't had a ton of time even against these good teams. Against Virginia and Army twice in the first 2 years, only 2 goals in those 3 games, disappointing. But if he, scores 3 against Notre Dame, puts in 2 against and a couple assists against North Carolina, starts to string these performances along, I think he can really change that narrative quickly. My negative, I guess it's also a cop-out in a way that I'm not going to pick a specific player, but rather a facet of the game. Face-offs. Face-offs have been a big letdown this year. Only 25% against Duke in the last week, which many would argue, I think, is the turning point in a 1-goal game. If Syracuse even gets to 33 or 40% face-off win percentage, maybe the Orange eke out that win. And it hasn't been an isolated event. SU is below 50% from the draws, including non-conference schedule games this year. That's just not acceptable, especially for a team who won 67% of draws last year. So, that's something that SU, I want to say they have to improve, but I don't see how it's going to improve when the quality of competition is only going to increase. I mean, Duke was a rude awakening. The Orange were just above average against their non-conference schedule, go up against one of, if not the best team in the country, and get burned. So face-offs need to improve, not just in the road, but also in the immediate future. Syracuse plays a Notre Dame team that's very good on the draw, and a team that's going to be really tough. To talk more about that matchup between Syracuse and Notre Dame coming up tomorrow, we sat down with the longtime Fighting Irish head coach, Kevin Corrigan, and he provided us with a lot of good information and a few good laughs as well. We are welcomed by Notre Dame head men's lacrosse coach, Kevin Corrigan. Coach, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
No problem, Ben. Happy to be here.
So, it's been an interesting season. We're kind of just starting our lacrosse coverage as we switch over from basketball. So for the listeners who haven't seen you guys play this year, how would you assess the performance of your 4-1 top 10 ranked Notre Dame team so far?
Well, I think like everybody, we're a work in progress right now. It's been obviously a year like no other in terms of, kind of the standard development timeline of your team starting in the fall and through your fall games and your off-season workout plan and everything else. It's kind of all been thrown into a bag and shaken up and spit back out and almost like an infinite variety of ways. And so, we're adjusting on the fly. That said, I think our guys have done a tremendous job of kind of staying focused and understanding that, things may not be like they were before, but they're everything's being done that needs to be done. And they've been really good about the work we've been able to get done. But our schedule hasn't been what it is to this point. Usually by the time we start ACC, we've already played 2 or 3 top 10 games. This year was a little bit different, forced on us by the travel restrictions and things. So, again, just another one of those changes that we have to work our way through.
And then, Coach, speaking of that schedule, you go 4 non-conference games, and then you just go through the gauntlet of an ACC schedule. How tough is that to sort of prep to know that, your last 6 games are just going to be against this unbelievably talented ACC so far?
I mean, honestly, it's not any different than what we've been through the last bunch of years. We've played 6 ACC games almost every year for the last 5 years. If you play the tournament and make it to the championship game, you play 6 ACC games. On top of that, you play Maryland and Denver and Ohio State and go down the line. So we're this isn't anything that we're unprepared for.
One guy who's really starred through the non-conference is Pat Kavanaugh, of course, who's the team's leader in points so far this season. What has he done so well to excel to this point early on?
Well, we played against a lot of zone in the first few games, and that in our system put the ball in his hands a lot, behind the cage where he was distributing. And he, he's awfully good in that situation. He's grown up with the game. He's got not just good skills, but a great sense of the game and feel for what's going on. And if you leave him back there, with the ball in his hands a lot, you're gonna pay for that at some point. And so I think that largely contributed to the big numbers. Now, the fact that he's a very good player and would probably be our leading scorer in any, manner that we were playing doesn't change. But I think, that's why you see like 7 assists in one game. It's not like he's beating his man, drawing a slide and putting the ball on somebody. He was in playing against the zone and just kind of picking it apart one play at a time.
Yeah, through the first 4 games, he was averaging nearly 7 points a game. Then against Virginia, it's a little bit of a drop off with just 2 assists. What do you think the adjustment was from the Cavaliers? Was it just the fact that he wasn't seeing a style of defense that he was used to? Is it the threat of ACC play? What kind of prevented him from breaking out as usual?
We played very good offense against Virginia. What we didn't do is finish the ball well. If I look back at the possessions, which is, it doesn't do us any good to just look at the numbers and go, gosh, we scored 11 goals. That's not good enough or whatever. We have to break it down possession by possession and see what was going on. And we were actually running very good offense. We just didn't finish the ball. And both things have to happen. We talk to our team all the time. There's 2 things that have to happen in a game. You have to play well and you have to make plays. We played well. We just didn't make enough plays.
When you sort of look at your team as a whole, is there a guy that you think sort of flies under the radar and doesn't get enough recognition? And if so, who would that guy be?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of those guys for us, to be honest with you. I don't think anybody talks about our midfielders, and yet I think every guy on our first midfield is an outstanding player. Then people don't talk much about short stick defensive midfielders, but I think we have as good a group of short stick defensive midfielders as anybody in the country. I think we have the best group of short stick defensive midfielders. So yeah, I think a lot of those guys fly under the radar because there's not been an appreciation for that, but I don't worry about that. That kind of attention comes when you're successful. If we want that attention, we have to come together as a team, play well, win games, and then there's enough attention for everybody.
It's going to be 2 of the best short stick defensive mini groups in the nation going up against each other in the game between SU and Notre Dame, and also 2 of the best coaches. You and John Desko, very familiar, have shared 2 different conferences together, and now 16 matchups since 2001. Are you tired of playing against Coach Desko? Is it fun to play against Coach Desko? What's the feeling with going up against Syracuse once again?
I love playing Syracuse. I love playing all the big games. The big games are the funnest games, and playing in the Dome, obviously one of the iconic places in our sport, and playing against Syracuse and the great history of that program and the great respect that I have for the former players and coaches from Syracuse as well as the current group. So no, there's nothing, no downside to that, short of you're gonna have to go in there and battle your tail
off. The game 2 years ago was one that I remember just because it was one of my first lacrosse games covering with Syracuse. But you've lost a couple of those guys that led the offense in that game, including Brian Costabile. What is sort of the big difference between maybe that offense and this attack or is it still sort of that same style that you've, embedded in Notre Dame?
I think there's some similarities, but I think the biggest thing for us right now is I think we have a group that's really it played as this is not an indictment. Pardon me. It's not an indictment of any team in the past, but this group is particularly unselfish. The ball doesn't sit with anybody very long, and that's the challenge of playing against this offensive group, is that the ball keeps moving. Guys are selective in their opportunities, and I think everybody has the ability to score, but also the ability to find other people, and so I think that's been probably the best thing that I like about this offensive group.
You look at sort of what you're saying, 10.5 assists per game, just about, I think it is. And then when you look at just sort of your overall stat sheet, I mean, the goals are just so widely distributed. Is that something that you've tried to do, or is, as you were just saying, is that just a reflection of these guys and just let whoever's got the open shot shoot?
Well, I think you're always trying to do that to some extent, right? I mean, but yeah, it's both.
Well, when you talk Notre Dame men's lacrosse, we have to talk defense, because that's, been the staple of a lot of your teams. I'm not going to ask you who you're shorting, because obviously I'm not trying to give your game plan up here. But how difficult is it to decide who to give a short pull to on Syracuse when there's such a wealth of attack in both the midfield and, of course, the attack group?
Yeah, I mean, that's a challenge in any team you play in our league. You got four polls, and they've got 6 outstanding offensive players. So it's a matter of kind of just, pick your poison, decide what you're comfortable giving up and what you feel like you don't want to give up, and then go from there. And you don't want to get too far away from who you are and what you do on an everyday basis. At least I don't. I know there's some people who don't mind changing game plans and trying all kinds of different and radical things. That's kind of not who we are. We try to fine tune execution and not game plans, because that would require too much of me. I'm not smart enough to come up with an infinite number of game plans, but I think we can teach our guys how to execute their game plan.
Coach, you just mentioned it with this conference, and obviously the ACC is wonderful every year. But is this year's set of teams do they stand out as better than the last few years? Where does this sort of set of ACC teams sort of rank in terms of your history of how powerful the ACC's been? Well,
I mean, I grew up in the ACC. I grew up as a kid watching and playing and coaching and so I've seen the ACC forever. I don't think it's ever been better. It's I mean, but you also never had a year where you had 5 years of college players playing together. I think you saw Duke when they had their situation and they had 5 years of players. They were pretty good for those years. I think they went to 4 Final Fours, right? And because they had 5 years worth of players and everybody else had 4. That you're better with 5 classes than you are with 4. I don't know if you know, but it's pretty much a given.
Have the ACC coaches talked to the NCAA at all about how to fit 5 ACC teams into the Final Four? Like, is there any sort of experiment?
You don't talk your way into the NCAA tournament. You play your way in.
I like it. I like it. One guy that a big focus will be on here in the 315 is David Lipka, who of course transferred from Syracuse to Notre Dame this season. Have you talked with David? Have you seen him practice? Is there, any extra juice coming into this game against his old team?
No, you know what? David comes every day, and brings what he has to practice. He's been a great addition to our team. You get a guy from Syracuse, you get a guy who's smart and well coached and has played high level games, and so he brings that to the table. But he brings also a great work ethic and the attributes that he has as a player too, and he brings them every day. He's not a guy that you suffer a lot of ups and downs with. He's a pretty steady character.
One place that you guys have really succeeded so far this season is the face-off X. Notre Dame's winning over 70% of draws. Syracuse has faltered a little, below 50%. I know it wasn't your team's best game last time out, but how important are face-offs going to be in this game against SU?
Well, face-offs are always important, last game wasn't a great game for us, but it didn't, we didn't lose a huge number where we were at some possession deficit. We just weren't on the positive side of that the way we had been in the previous games this year. But listen, you never go into a game expecting to be on the way upside of that game, because every face-off guy has his kryptonite, and you never know till that day and that game and the dynamics of what's going on there. The officials and the rhythm that they use and their tolerance for guys, rolling into a face-off or whatever is different every single game. And all that can affect what happens at that X every game. So, you go in there with a plan of how to, what you're going to do if you're successful, what you're going to do if you're not successful. And just the idea that no matter what happened on the last face-off, the next one's going to be a battle.
Have you seen more of that parity or randomness of how the face-offs are called and the general luck with it this year with the new rules implemented?
Actually, less of it probably, but you're talking to a guy who wishes we'd taken the face-off out of the game 10 years ago. I think it has an inordinate amount of influence in the game, and for that reason, I don't like it. And I wish that there was I think that. I would love to see us, personally, I'd love to see a game where we had, 4 face-offs a game and played alternate possession in between, because I think that those are the true tests of one team against the other team, and not the inordinate influence that a guy winning 75% of face-offs in a game can completely skew everything else that happens in the game.
Well, it's very interesting. I don't know how many times I've heard that before, but I like it. Before we let you go here, we're going to do one last thing, a little fill in the blanks.
By the way, let me just say one thing.
Go for it.
In the meantime, I want to have a great face-off guy.
Yes.
I don't make the rules, So we're really happy that with the guys we have, with the guys we're recruiting, and we're going to continue to play the rules as they're written, not as I might want to see them.
Yes, the job security of your face-off guys are not threatened by your feelings about the face-off.
Exactly.
All right, let's do fill in the blanks here. If your team, Notre Dame, wins, it will be because of blank, and if your team is unsuccessful at the Dome, it will be because of blank.
Because we score more goals than them, or because they score more goals than us?
That was a very Greg Popovich answer. I like it. All right. Well, Kevin Corrigan, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and good luck in the game against SU.
Okay, Ben, Owen, thank you guys. Appreciate it. Have a good day.
Same to you, Coach.
Thank you.
All right, fellas.
Appreciate it.
Really
Thank you so much.
it.
Peace.
Thanks again to Coach Corrigan for taking the time to speak with us today as Notre Dame tries to get into snowy Syracuse, snowy in April, because the Irish had some flight problems thanks to the Northeast. Heading into this Notre Dame game, there are a lot of big focal points. Kavanaugh, the defense both stick out. Could be something else, Owen. What first comes to mind there with what's crucial in this matchup?
One of the big things for me is just to sort of go macro here a little bit, in that Syracuse and Notre Dame have played some great games in the last 5-10 years. I think it's 4 of their last 7 have been 1-goal finishes. They've played good games, and so this is just like I'll keep saying it, all of these ACC teams historically seem to play pretty close games, pretty tight games, pretty competitive games. That's just what you're going to have to expect this year, outside of, maybe a couple anomalies like that Syracuse Virginia game, the second game of the season for the Orange. But this is a good Notre Dame team, and the big thing that sticks out to me as well is sort of what Coach was mentioning: the distribution of goals, the distribution of offense, the distribution of scoring is really special, because when you look at a team, typically, there's one, maybe two guys that stand out on offense. And, Syracuse is fortunate to have that depth, but Notre Dame, I mean, outside of Pat Kavanaugh, who is the assist guy, I mean, they've got what, 7, 8, maybe even more guys in that like 5 to 10 goal range, which is just so good for an offense when you don't maybe have that one scorer to just be able to run an offense. And it's sort of, to go back to Syracuse basketball coverage for a second, in years past, the Tyus Battle years, the Elijah Hughes years, they didn't necessarily have an offense just because they defaulted to iso ball too much. Notre Dame runs an offense because everyone can score, and there's not necessarily that one guy that's levels ahead of the rest. And it's really beneficial to them. And something that Coach mentioned is why his offense has been able to have that early season success.
Yeah, it's a big flip. I mean, I know a lot of people compared Kavanaugh's young success to the incredible career of Michael Sowers. And considering, how great Kavanaugh has been so far, I understand the comparison. But the difference between Duke, at least, and Notre Dame, the Blue Devils have two really, really good guys. Not that everyone else isn't still amazing, but it's Sowers and O'Neal, and that's who most of the time you're focused in on. Notre Dame, it's literally everyone. So I'm not sure if it'll be easier for SU because there's no one quite like Sowers, who, broke Wyckoff's ankles multiple times during the game and really caused a lot of late slides, or if it's tougher because, your slide discipline in a way needs to be even better, because letting anyone go free could be dangerous because everyone can put the ball in the back of the net. But what I think I do know is how important the defensive middies are going to be in this game. Brett Kennedy, who was a close defense guy, got moved up after Wyckoff got into the starting spot because Kennedy is more naturally an LSM. Peter Dearth, who, Coach Corrigan said they have in Notre Dame the best short stick defensive midi group in the country. That may very well be true, but Dearth was the preseason first team All-American short stick defensive midi. So he needs to play like it tomorrow. And then, if it's Barlow or whoever else goes out on LSM, Clary, it needs to be a strong day from the defensive middies, because there's a lot of firepower coming from a lot of places on the Irish, and it's going to be tough for SU to catch up. On the offensive side of the ball, you harped on Scanlon before we talked about the interview. You praised Hiltz. I talked about Rifus. The offensive middies are always in the picture. Who are you looking to stand out in this game?
Well, God, I'll give him a chance. I told you I'm critical, but I'm on the fence. I'm looking at Scanlon. This is a game where he can tip me right over and bring me onto the bandwagon here, because he is showing that he's right there. And I do want to get back in here and say that this is it's one of those, like, it's when a parent gets on their kid because they know they can achieve more, they know that they can do more. That's sort of my gripe with Scanlon, is I think he has the ability to facilitate and create offense a little bit better than he does. And that's where my critique really comes. So I'm right on the fence with him. But I am going to default, and I'm going to take you away from the offense for a second, because I think Syracuse's offense and Syracuse's ability to win this game revolts back to a point that we did just touch upon a little bit with Coach, and gives us a chance to get into this a little bit deeper. Notre Dame over 70% faceoffs this year. Syracuse under 50% at this point. So my keys to this game are going to come at the faceoff X for Syracuse, just because of how much they've had to struggle at different points throughout this season. I'm looking at Jacob Fopp. I am looking at Danny Varello, if he gets a little bit of run there as well. These are guys that need to step things up, and you've got to be able to control possessions, even if Coach does not like that. The faceoffs control possessions. The way the looks of it, he should be very glorious in the fact that the faceoffs control possessions, because his Fogos have gotten them boatloads of bonus possessions this season.
So, Fopp struggled last game. Varello came in. Obviously, the overall numbers, Fopp's about 55% and Varello's only 33%, but it was pretty clear that Danny was better last game than Jacob was. If Fopp starts struggling again, how long is your leash? If you're, putting Owen Valentine in the shoes of John Desco, how long's your leash before you swing it over to Varello?
Relatively short. But it's a relatively short leash for Varello, and possibly, you're going to just go tandem and give them both shots throughout this game, throughout, different points in this matchup. I think you give Varello 4. I think he's guaranteed 4. If you're down 3-1 and you didn't just win the fourth, maybe that's the time for the switch. But I think this is one where you're going to have to be strategic a little bit if Fopp's not really there, or if Fopp struggles early on. But this is also a game where you really only need to be 50%. I think that when you're in conference play, yes, it's going to be great to have the advantage at the face-off X, but you need to be competitive. You can't come into these games and have these massive discrepancies at the face-off X, which has happened a handful of times. I mean, that was the case against Duke. That was the case against Vermont. That was the case against Stony Brook. Like, it was tough. They really, really needed to figure some things out. Excuse me, not Stony Brook. They did fine against Stony Brook. Let me fix that. But Vermont and Duke, they got absolutely demolished at the faceoff X. And Vermont's a game that you win by 4, but was a close game, and you easily could have won by double figures, even if you were, a couple of more face-offs and a little bit higher on that percentage. And then Duke is a game that you lose by 1, but I mean, you were 33% from the face-off X. That's not a metric to win you games. So you've got to be 50%. It's not asking the most out of these guys. You just need to be 50%, because the offense and the defense have proven that they can, hold teams in check and get their goals. But if you can just even and level that playing field out a little bit more, especially in this, we'll say it so many times, it's a gauntlet of an ACC schedule. And, Syracuse, we say favorable for them to draw Notre Dame twice. But in theory, Notre Dame, the number 9 team in the country, is the worst team in the ACC. So you've got to be right at that 50-50 threshold. If you can't, get any sort of control or dominance, you just have to be competitive there, because the rest of the team has shown that they can keep you in games if you're not at a 65% face-off clip.
For all the non-YouTube listeners, Owen air quotes worst team, because it's almost a statement that shouldn't be made about any ACC team, because we just Notre Dame. If Notre Dame beats Syracuse, then all of a sudden Notre Dame probably jumps the orange and SU becomes the de facto worst team in the ACC. Face-offs definitely going to be a big key. In the Orange's big win over Virginia, 67% from the face-off X when the Orange beat the Cavaliers by 10 early this season. Notre Dame. Let's get back to the worst team in the ACC, air quotes, coming to Syracuse, number 9 in the nation. I hate to say this, but I think this is a must-win game for Syracuse, just given the fact that the other 3 ACC games are North Carolina, at Virginia, and at Notre Dame. I think this probably presents the easiest matchup in what's, a conference that presents no matchup short of incredibly difficult.
Yeah, and I hope this is a game that some of the students get out for too, because it would be cooler to have some folks in there to give them a little bit of an advantage here, because this is, as you mentioned, you're playing a top 10 team in the Dome, but this is your probably easiest conference game left, because that Notre Dame game on the road is going to be a little bit tougher. And then North Carolina, Virginia also every ACC game is going to be such a grind this year. And, if for anyone who, watches the broader lacrosse landscape and will put on a non-Syracuse game, Duke, North Carolina was electric last night. There have been so many good ACC games. And it's just because of how level that playing field is, despite, having a 1, 2, 4, 5, 9 ranking. I mean, they are all right there. And that's why you've seen some absolute thrillers. So this is a game for Syracuse. You've got to be able to control. And it's a tough one because of how, we talked about it. They spread that offense out. They can distribute. Anyone can make that cut. Anyone can get in front of the net. It's going to be a big game for Drake Porter. I think Notre Dame's going to get their shots. Notre Dame coming off of a game against Virginia where they weren't as effective with their shots as you probably would have liked. So look for them to maybe be a little bit more selective in favor of, getting a better look and a more open look. But it's a Notre Dame team that was right there. And they were, I'm going to say, in the driver's seat a lot in that Virginia game. They were the one taking the lead for a while, and then Virginia would tie it up, and then they would go up and Virginia would tie it up. And then Virginia, got a little bit ahead down the stretch there. So it's a Notre Dame team that sort of had, their first ACC win slip out of their fingers a little bit. It's going to be a hungry team, and all of these ACC games are going to be so competitive that you've got to play your A game every conference game, because anyone here will embarrass you if you don't.
Yeah, I think there's value in the fact too, that was Notre Dame's first ACC game. So for all the freshmen and all the sophomores, no one had ever played an ACC opponent before. Of course, Virginia had already been blitzed by SU. So some of their younger guys had already gotten a feel for what the best conference in college lacrosse is all about. Now Notre Dame comes off a heartbreaking loss, like you said, hungry for that first conference win of the season. Before we wrap it up, let's get some predictions going, Owen. What do you see here between SU and Notre Dame tomorrow?
I think it's going to be a grinded out ACC game. You've got two solid offenses, two solid defenses. I think Syracuse has the edge here still, just because of that depth and the offense that, both lines of midfielders have been phenomenal this year. And then Porter in net has been, nothing but spectacular for the majority of this season. I think Syracuse edges this one out. I'm going to say low scoring, but use that term loosely. I think it's a 12-10 win for Syracuse. But as I said, this is a game that could easily go in the opposite direction if Syracuse gets a slow start. And I mean, the last time these two teams played, Syracuse got out to possibly the worst start in the history of starts, with a 9-1 deficit, and you were down 11-2 in the second quarter. So the Notre Dame can expose you if you're not ready to play. So if Syracuse is not ready to play, that can easily be flipped. But I do think they can get this one done. 12-10 is going to be my prediction, and I've got a really good feeling about that number. So just circle it, keep an eye on it, and then we'll return back to this for our next episode when I get it exactly right.
I promise you I'm not lying. My prediction was 12-9. I don't know if I want to stay with it now. I think I'm going to, because I don't want to, I'm already bad enough at predictions. If I try and change it to something I don't 100% believe in, it's going to be bad. So I'm going to go 12-9. Yeah, I think this is a game that's close throughout, and then SU maybe pulls away just in the latter stages of the fourth quarter. But if the faceoffs are so heavily skewed, as they have been in favor of Notre Dame and not in favor of SU for both those two teams this year, I could easily see the Irish walking out of here with the win and Syracuse being in a lot of trouble. 4-3 is not a place that SU wants to be as an ACC team trying to get, that bid to the NCAA tournament. And, you would assume all ACC teams are going to get in, but, assumptions only go so far. So SU needs to continue to play well, and that starts tomorrow at 12 p.m. We'll have that broadcast here on WAER at noon Saturday, and we'll have countdown to face-off starting at 11:30 on WAER, the app, the website, as well as 88.3 FM, the old-fashioned radio station. Again, make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, hit that notifications bell, subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Leave a rating, leave a review. Is there something you don't like? Let us know. We're always open to constructive criticism, and we are happy to fit whatever you would like into the podcast. If there's a topic you want to hear or a question you want us to debate, we're more than happy to do that. Reach out to us on Twitter at Ostrom Avenue Pod. Let us know what you want in the pod, what you like from the pod, and we'll get that in there as well. And we got a lot of exciting lacrosse going forward, Owen. 6 more games in this season, 4 more ACC opponents, a great season finale with Utah. It should be a lot of fun. We'll have it here right here on the Ostrom Avenue Pod coming up. But for Owen Valentine, I'm Ben Shulman. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.